boy stood at the edge of the room, his eyes fixed on the grand piano that gleamed under the soft lights. Every curve of its polished wood, every shine on the keys, seemed to call out to him. He had seen people play before, sitting with their backs straight and fingers dancing effortlessly across the keys. There was something magical about the way the music flowed from their hands, filling the room with sounds that seemed to carry stories of joy, sorrow, and wonder. He felt a pull in his chest, a deep longing that he couldn't quite explain. He had always loved music, ever since he could remember. Even when he was very small, he would hum tunes that he heard in the streets, in the market, or in the soft radio melodies at home. His parents didn't have much, but they encouraged his love for sound. A small, old keyboard in the corner of their living room had been his companion for years. It wasn't fancy and some of the keys were slightly stuck, but to him it was as if it had a soul. He would press the keys one by one, experimenting, making mistakes, and yet always finding something beautiful to create. The piano in the grand room, however, was different. It was perfection, smooth and grand, almost like it had been waiting for someone like him. The boy's heart raced as he inched closer, careful not to draw too much attention. The room was filled with people he didn't know well, adults mostly, who seemed to glide around the piano with ease. Their conversation was soft, polite, almost reverent, as if the instrument deserved not just attention but respect. He watched as a woman played a few notes, her fingers gliding over the keys like water flowing over stones. He held his breath, mesmerized. Every sound that came from the piano seemed to reach into him, lifting him, moving him in ways words never could. He wanted nothing more than to touch it, to feel the keys beneath his fingers, to try and make the sounds himself. But something held him back. He had seen other children approach before, timidly, and the adults had shooed them away, politely but firmly. The piano seemed untouchable, a treasure too fragile, too important. The boy understood this, yet it did nothing to quell the desire inside him. He imagined his fingers finding the right notes, the right rhythm, the right touch, and for a brief moment, he could almost hear himself playing a melody that made everyone stop and listen. As he lingered, his eyes wandered over the intricate details of the piano. The carved legs, the shiny surface, the reflection of lights that seemed to dance across it. Each detail was a story, a mystery. He wondered about the people who had played before him, the music that had filled this room over the years, the emotions that had been poured into every note. It was overwhelming and yet exciting. He felt both small and infinite at the same time, a tiny person in a vast world of sound and beauty. He tried to focus on something else to calm his nerves. He noticed a small boy a few feet away, quietly sitting on a bench, watching as a young man played a soft tune. The young man's hands moved quickly, almost magically, and the boy noticed how the older man's eyes closed as if he were seeing something no one else could see. The boy envied that, not for the skill alone but for the connection, the pure joy of losing oneself in music. He wanted that too. More than anything, he wanted to feel what it must be like to create something that could touch the hearts of others. He remembered the hours he had spent at home, alone with his old keyboard. He would close his eyes and imagine himself in a grand room, just like this one, playing a piano that could sing. He would make up melodies, some soft and gentle, others loud and triumphant. Sometimes he would play with so much feeling that he forgot the time, forgot to eat, forgot the world outside. Those moments were precious to him, and he longed for more. Yet, he also knew that this piano, this real, magnificent piano, was not something that could be approached lightly. There were rules, adults, expectations. A soft murmur of conversation drew his attention. One of the adults approached the piano, a small smile on their face, clearly proud of the instrument. The boy stepped a little closer, careful, as if distance could somehow protect him from being noticed. He imagined himself asking, just asking, to try it. The words hovered on the tip of his tongue, and his heart thumped in his chest. He could feel a mix of fear and hope twisting together, a strange, powerful feeling that made him want to run and stay at the same time. He thought about what might happen if he did ask. Would they laugh? Would they gently tell him no? Or maybe, just maybe, they would let him play. The possibility made his chest tighten with both excitement and nerves. He could almost see himself sitting on the bench, fingers hovering over the keys, unsure at first, then finding the rhythm, the music, the joy that he had dreamed about for so long. He imagined the room going silent as the notes started to fill the space, everyone listening, surprised by the beauty coming from such a small, timid boy. The boy closed his eyes for a moment, letting himself dream. He pictured the melody he would play, one that told a story of longing, of hope, of quiet wonder. Each note would be a word, each phrase a sentence, and the whole piece a story that everyone could feel. He could feel the music in his chest, like a heartbeat, strong and steady. His fingers itched to move, to find the keys, to make the sounds real. He took a deep breath, holding on to the dream, trying to gather courage. Just then, a hand rested lightly on his shoulder. He jumped slightly, turning to see an older woman, kind but firm, looking down at him. Her eyes were gentle but serious. "The piano is not for playing by everyone," she said softly. The words fell like a small weight on his heart. He nodded, trying not to let his disappointment show. He understood, of course he did. He had known this was not a space for just anyone. But the longing inside him only grew, a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. He stepped back, pretending to look at something else, but he couldn't. His eyes kept returning to the piano, the dream, the possibility. He watched as another adult approached, placing a hand lightly on the keys, pressing a note that rang clear and true. The sound seemed to reach into him, deep and warm, filling every corner of his mind with longing. He realized that this moment, this music, was something he wanted more than anything, more than play, more than praise, more than attention. He wanted the music itself, the feeling it gave him, the way it could speak without words. As the room continued around him, filled with conversation, laughter, and the occasional soft note from the piano, he stood quietly, absorbing everything. The smell of polished wood, the soft echo of footsteps, the delicate balance of voices, all of it became part of the music he was imagining, the story he was longing to tell. He felt small in the world, yes, but also alive, part of something bigger, something beautiful that waited for him if he could only find a way to touch it. He made a silent promise to himself. One day he would play that piano, not to impress anyone, not to be noticed, but to feel the music pour through him, to create the wonder he had only ever dreamed of. And until that day came, he would watch, he would listen, he would dream. Every note he heard would be a step closer, every melody a guide to the music he was destined to play. The longing in his heart was strong, but it was not despair. It was hope, quiet and steady, like a soft flame that refused to go out. And so he stood there, eyes fixed on the piano, heart filled with yearning, and fingers itching to create the magic that only he could imagine. The world moved around him. Adults came and went. Music filled the air. But he remained rooted, waiting, dreaming, preparing for the moment when his hands could finally bring the music to life. That moment, he knew, would be unforgettable. The boy's heart pounded as he stepped closer to the piano once more. He could feel the smooth wood under his fingertips, imagining how it would feel when he finally played it. He wanted to ask again, but his courage wavered. The adults nearby were busy with conversations, moving around with care and attention, as if the piano were the center of an invisible world they alone understood. He hesitated, wondering if it was the right moment, and then he whispered, almost to himself, "May I try?" One of the adults turned toward him, a gentle but firm expression on their face. "The piano is not for everyone," they said softly. There was no anger, no harshness, only a calm warning. The boy's shoulders sagged slightly. He had expected this, but it still hurt. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, and now the door seemed closed again. His fingers twitched involuntarily, as if they were aching to press the keys and prove themselves. He moved back a little, pretending to examine the room, but his eyes never left the piano. Every movement, every sound around him seemed amplified. The soft shuffle of feet, the quiet laughter of children, the hum of voices. All of it blended into a melody in his mind. He remembered the hours he had spent at home with his old keyboard, creating his own music in solitude. Every small achievement, every tune he had practiced, gave him hope that one day he would be able to play something truly beautiful on this piano. He watched as another young boy approached the piano, a visitor who was quickly pulled back by an adult before he could touch the keys. The scene made him ache with frustration. It wasn't just that he wasn't allowed. It was the feeling that no one understood how much music meant to him. He wanted to show them, to let them see the fire in his fingers, the passion in his heart. But he also knew that arguing or insisting would not help. He had to find another way. That evening, the boy returned home with his small keyboard tucked carefully under his arm. The old instrument was scratched and worn, but it had a life of its own. He sat down, closed his eyes, and let his imagination take over. He pictured the grand piano, the polished wood, the gleaming keys, and he let his fingers find melodies that flowed from his memory and his heart. Sometimes, the music was soft, almost whispering. Other times, it was strong and bold, as if challenging the world to listen. In those moments, he forgot about rejection, about the people who had said no. The music became his world, and he became part of it. Days passed, and he spent every spare moment at the piano, at least in his mind. At school, during breaks, he would tap imaginary keys on his desk, moving his fingers in patterns that he had memorized. At home, he would practice for hours, listening closely to the notes he created, adjusting and improving, learning patience and control. Slowly, he began to understand the power of practice, of perseverance, of believing in himself even when others doubted him. One afternoon, he returned to the grand house, carrying his courage like a fragile flame. The adults were gathered around, talking quietly. The piano sat in the corner, bathed in sunlight, waiting as if it knew he would come. He stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly, and said, "Please, may I try just for a moment?" The adult he had spoken to before shook their head, gentle but firm. "Not today," they said. "It's too delicate. Maybe another time." The words were kind, but they felt like a lock closing around his heart. He nodded, hiding his disappointment as best he could, and moved to the side. He didn't leave, though. He stayed nearby, watching, listening, imagining every note he would play if only he could sit at the piano. That evening, he went home and sat with his small keyboard again. His fingers moved with more confidence now, as if the piano had whispered to him, teaching him in secret. He began to compose small pieces, short melodies that told stories of longing, hope, and dreams. Each piece was different, each one a step closer to the music he had always wanted to create. Sometimes he would close his eyes and picture the audience, the adults who had said no, the people who had doubted him. He imagined them listening, amazed, moved by the sounds that had come from his fingers. Weeks turned into months, and the boy's skill grew quietly but steadily. He became more patient, more deliberate, learning that music was not just about quick fingers but about feeling, about telling a story without words. He spent hours alone, experimenting, making mistakes, learning to correct them. The small keyboard became his teacher and his friend, guiding him toward something greater. Every day, the dream of the grand piano grew stronger, and he felt certain that one day he would play it. He just needed the right moment. One day, while he was practicing in the room where the piano was kept, a young woman who had noticed his persistence approached. She was kind and gentle, watching him play quietly. "You have a gift," she said softly. "Not everyone can hear the music the way you do." The boy paused, looking up at her, his heart racing. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. Encouraged, he continued to play, letting the music fill the space. He didn't know if anyone else could hear the melody, but he felt it with every fiber of his being. Over time, he found small moments when he could approach the piano without being asked. Sometimes, the adults were busy elsewhere, and he would carefully run his fingers over the keys, letting the sound escape in small, careful notes. He was learning to be patient, to respect the instrument, but also to trust in himself. Each time he played, he felt a little closer to the dream he had carried for so long. The boy began to notice that his playing was changing. The music became smoother, richer, more expressive. His fingers moved more freely, and his confidence grew. He understood that the piano was not just an object to be touched but a world to be explored, a friend to be spoken to through notes and rhythm. He began to see the piano not as something forbidden but as a challenge waiting for him, a puzzle he could solve with practice, dedication, and love for the music. He kept his determination a secret from most people, only revealing it in small ways. At school, he would hum melodies quietly to himself. At home, he would practice for hours, sometimes losing track of time completely. Each note was a step closer to the moment he had imagined so many times, the moment when he would finally sit at the grand piano and let the music flow freely, surprising everyone with the beauty he could create. The longing, the hope, and the quiet fire in his heart grew stronger every day. And so, the boy continued, balancing patience and desire, dreaming and practicing, learning and growing. Every note he played on his small keyboard, every melody he imagined in his mind, was a preparation for the day when he could finally touch the grand piano. He knew it would not be easy, and he knew the adults might still say no, but he also knew that he had something rare inside him. A love for music so strong that it could not be ignored, a passion that would find a way to reach the keys and the hearts of those who listened. He was ready to wait, ready to learn, and ready to play when the moment came. The boy's determination grew stronger with each passing day. He had learned that patience was a part of music, just as much as skill and passion. Every time he practiced on his small keyboard at home, he imagined the grand piano, imagining the smooth touch of the keys under his fingers and the sounds echoing through the large room. The more he imagined it, the more real it became to him. Sometimes, he would close his eyes and picture himself sitting at the piano, feeling the weight of the keys, the warmth of the wood, and the music flowing naturally from his soul. One evening, he decided to explore the area around the grand piano more closely. He had noticed that the room had other instruments, smaller keyboards, and even sheet music scattered on shelves. He approached quietly, careful not to disturb anyone, and ran his fingers lightly over an old, unused keyboard tucked into a corner. It was dusty and worn, but when he pressed a key, a note rang out, soft and simple. He smiled, realizing that even the smallest instrument could teach him something new. He practiced on it for hours, experimenting with melodies, rhythms, and harmonies. Every note felt like a tiny step closer to the day he would finally play the grand piano. The boy had become more confident in his abilities. At school, he would hum melodies under his breath, often catching the attention of teachers and classmates. Sometimes, he would be asked to play small tunes on the classroom piano, which was nothing like the grand instrument he longed for, but it was a start. Each time he played, he noticed his fingers moving more freely, and he began to feel a connection to music that went beyond practice and technique. It was as if the music was a part of him and he a part of it. He felt alive in a way that nothing else could give him. At home, he would spend hours composing pieces of his own. He would start with simple patterns, then build them into more complex melodies. Sometimes, he would imagine a story behind each piece, giving the music a life of its own. The small keyboard became his teacher, guiding him, showing him the possibilities hidden within each note. He had learned to listen carefully, to feel the vibrations of sound, to understand how a melody could speak without words. The practice was intense, but it filled him with joy, hope, and a growing sense of purpose. The boy's parents noticed the changes in him. They saw how his eyes would light up when he played, how he would lose himself in music for hours without distraction. They began to encourage him more, providing small pieces of advice and gentle guidance. They didn't have much, but they understood that music had become his world, a place where he could express what he could not say in words. They would sometimes sit quietly and listen, smiling as his fingers danced across the keys, creating melodies that seemed to reach deep into their hearts. Despite his progress, the grand piano remained a distant dream. Every visit to the room reminded him of what he could not yet achieve. He watched others play, noticing the precision, the flow, the ease with which they moved their hands. He longed to feel that same connection, to let the music flow from him naturally. Yet he did not despair. He knew that he had to wait for the right moment, to earn the chance through patience and skill. Each day, each practice session, each imagined melody was a step toward that moment. One afternoon, while practicing quietly in a corner of the room near the grand piano, he was noticed by an older man who had often played in the house. The man stopped and listened, intrigued by the boy's focused expression and the subtle beauty of the notes he created. He did not interrupt, simply allowing the boy to continue. When the piece ended, the man nodded approvingly. "You have a good ear," he said softly. "Not everyone can hear music like you do." The boy's heart swelled with pride and hope. He had never received such recognition before, and it fueled his determination even more. Encouraged by this, the boy began to take more risks in his practice. He experimented with faster tempos, more complex harmonies, and intricate rhythms. He pushed his fingers, his mind, and his imagination to new limits, learning to adapt and improvise. He discovered that mistakes were not failures but opportunities to learn, and that patience, persistence, and practice could overcome almost any challenge. Music became a journey, a path he walked every day with a quiet determination that few could understand. One evening, the boy discovered a small gap in the schedule of the house, a time when the adults were away, and the room with the grand piano was empty. He approached the piano cautiously, almost holding his breath, and placed his fingers lightly on the keys. He felt the smooth surface, the cold but inviting touch of the ivory keys, and he pressed a note. The sound rang out, clear and beautiful, filling the room with a resonance that made his heart leap. He pressed another, and then another, letting his fingers move naturally, instinctively, guided by the countless hours of practice on smaller keyboards. The boy began to play a simple melody, soft and tentative at first, but growing stronger and more confident with each passing moment. He felt a connection to the piano, as if it were responding to his touch, encouraging him, guiding him. The notes flowed from him effortlessly, telling a story that he had carried in his heart for years. The room seemed to listen, holding its breath, and he felt a joy unlike any he had ever known. For the first time, he understood that his dream was within reach, that the music he had imagined so vividly could become real. He continued to play, experimenting with different rhythms and harmonies, letting the music express everything he had felt but never said. Each note was a word, each phrase a sentence, and the whole piece a story that no one else could tell. He felt a sense of freedom, of expression, of wonder, that made the hours slip by unnoticed. The piano had become his friend, his companion, and his teacher, guiding him toward a level of skill and understanding that he had only dreamed of before. As the boy played, he began to imagine an audience, people who would listen and feel the emotions he poured into the music. He pictured their faces, their reactions, the way they might be moved by the melodies. This visualization made his playing even more passionate, more expressive, more alive. He realized that music was not just about notes and keys, but about the ability to touch hearts, to communicate without words, to create wonder in those who listened. The realization filled him with a sense of purpose, a mission that went beyond personal desire. Days turned into weeks, and the boy continued to find small moments to practice on or near the grand piano. Each session made him stronger, more confident, more attuned to the nuances of sound and rhythm. He learned to control the dynamics of each note, the timing, the subtle shifts in melody that could transform a simple tune into something extraordinary. He became more patient, more observant, and more respectful of the piano and the music itself. Each practice session was a lesson, a discovery, and a step closer to the moment he had longed for all his life. The boy began to notice changes in himself beyond music. He became more confident, more patient, more focused. He learned to manage his disappointment when access to the piano was denied and to channel his energy into practice and preparation. He discovered that true skill was not just about talent but about persistence, discipline, and belief in oneself. Music had taught him lessons that reached far beyond the keys, shaping him into a person ready for challenges, ready for opportunity, and ready for the moment when he could finally prove himself. And so, the boy's journey continued, a delicate balance of longing, practice, and hope. He remained patient, waiting for the right moment, while preparing himself in secret to meet it. He had learned that music was not just about immediate gratification but about growth, about understanding, about the joy that came from seeing progress and achieving mastery. The grand piano was no longer an untouchable dream but a goal within reach, a challenge that he was prepared to meet with all the skill, patience, and heart he had cultivated. Every day, he moved closer, readying himself for the moment when his fingers would finally bring music to life on the piano he had long admired. One quiet afternoon, the boy found himself near the grand piano once again. The house was unusually calm. Most of the adults were in another part of the building, and there was a soft, golden light spilling through the tall windows. He stepped closer, feeling the anticipation in his chest, like a mix of excitement and nervousness that made his fingers tingle. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then let his hands hover above the keys. He hesitated for just a moment, remembering all the times he had been told no. The words echoed softly in his mind. The piano is not for everyone. But this time something felt different. The room was quiet, the opportunity rare, and he felt ready. He pressed a single key, and a note rang out clearly. The sound made him catch his breath. It was more beautiful than he had imagined, resonating through the room and into his chest. He pressed another, and then another, slowly at first testing, feeling the response of the piano beneath his fingers. As he became more confident, his movements grew steadier. He began to play a simple melody he had composed in his mind countless times. The notes flowed naturally, as if the piano had been waiting for him, as if it recognized the longing in his heart and responded to it. Each chord, each arpeggio, filled the space with sound, and he felt a surge of joy that made him forget the world outside the room. The music was alive, moving through him, carrying his emotions, his dreams, his hope. Unbeknownst to him, one of the adults had returned quietly to the room. They had seen the boy standing near the piano before, but now they froze, listening in awe. There he was, small and focused, creating a melody that seemed far beyond his years. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the pure flow of music from a heart that had longed for it for so long. The adult watched silently, realizing that the boy's talent was extraordinary, something rare and delicate, like a hidden jewel finally revealed. The boy continued to play, unaware of the attention he was receiving. His fingers danced over the keys, striking chords and notes with a confidence he had never shown before. The melody was soft at first, tender and careful, but it began to grow, sweeping through the room, strong and vibrant. He could feel the piano responding to him, the resonance vibrating in his chest, in his hands, in every part of him. It was a moment he had dreamed of, worked for, and imagined 1,000 times, and now it was real. As the music filled the room, the boy's imagination soared. He pictured the reactions of people listening, their eyes widening, their expressions softening, their hearts touched by the melody. The music told a story of patience, longing, and determination. Every note was a word, every phrase a sentence, and the whole piece a narrative of his journey. He played with all the emotion he had carried inside him, letting the piano be the voice he had waited to find for so long. The adult stepped closer, careful not to startle him. They observed the subtle movements of his fingers, the way his hands seemed to glide effortlessly across the keys. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only expression, only connection. The boy's playing was fluid, natural, and filled with feeling, as if the music had always been inside him, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The adult could hardly believe the talent unfolding before their eyes. They felt a mixture of awe, pride, and wonder. For the boy, time seemed to stretch and bend. He was lost in the music, unaware of the world outside. He played faster, then slower, louder, then softer, experimenting with dynamics and tempo, bringing each section of his melody to life. Every note carried a piece of his heart. Every chord told a story he had kept to himself for years. The room seemed to hold its breath, wrapped in the sound, the piano, and the boy's quiet brilliance. After what felt like both a moment and an eternity, the boy finished the piece with a soft, lingering note. The silence that followed was heavy, profound, and almost sacred. He lowered his hands slowly, eyes still closed, savoring the final vibration of the last chord. His chest heaved with exhilaration, his heart pounding with joy and relief. He had done it. He had touched the piano and made it sing in a way that was entirely his own. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw the adult standing nearby, a look of amazement and admiration on their face. There was a quiet pause, and then the adult smiled, stepping closer with a gentle nod. "That was incredible," they said softly. "I have never heard anything like it." The boy's face flushed, a mix of pride, disbelief, and shy happiness. For the first time, someone had truly recognized his gift, his passion, and his hard work. The boy listened as the adult continued. "You have a rare gift, and the way you feel the music is extraordinary. Most people wait years to achieve even a fraction of what you just played." The words filled him with warmth and encouragement. He realized that all the hours of practice, all the patience, all the dreaming had led to this moment. He had not only touched the piano but had touched the hearts of someone who understood music and talent. The boy felt a surge of confidence. He realized that he could play not just for himself but for others, to share the emotions and stories within him. The piano was no longer an untouchable dream but a partner, a friend, a voice for his feelings. He began to experiment again, softly at first, exploring new melodies, letting his fingers wander across the keys. The adult watched in quiet awe, careful not to disturb him, but fully aware that this was a moment that would be remembered. Hours passed without the boy noticing. He was completely absorbed in the music, letting his emotions flow freely. The room was filled with notes that danced and shimmered, rising and falling like a gentle wave. Every chord carried a message, every pause a breath of emotion. The boy's skill, his imagination, and his heart combined to create something truly remarkable, a moment of pure wonder that no one who witnessed it would forget. Eventually, the boy paused again, catching his breath and resting his hands lightly on the keys. He looked up at the adult, who nodded with approval and admiration. "You are ready," they said simply. "Ready to show the world what you can do." The boy's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and humility. He had not expected such words, not so soon, not in this quiet moment. Yet, deep inside, he knew they were true. All the practice, all the patience, all the longing had prepared him for this moment, and now he was ready to take the next step. The boy smiled softly, feeling a mix of relief, joy, and quiet pride. He realized that talent was only part of the journey. The rest was patience, persistence, and belief in oneself. He had learned that music was not just about notes and keys, but about connection, emotion, and expression. He had learned that dreams could come true when nurtured with care, dedication, and love. And he had learned that sometimes, the most extraordinary moments came when least expected, in the quiet, golden light of a room filled with music and possibility. The boy left the piano that day with a new sense of purpose. He knew that this was only the beginning, that many challenges and opportunities lay ahead. But he also knew that he had found his voice, that the piano had become an extension of himself, and that he had the courage and skill to create wonder wherever he went. He carried the memory of that day in his heart, the feeling of the keys under his fingers, the music flowing from his soul, and the quiet admiration of someone who had truly understood his gift. It was a moment he would never forget, a moment that would shape the rest of his life and the music he would share with the world. The boy returned to the grand piano many times after that first moment. Each time, he felt a new sense of confidence and connection. He was no longer just a dreamer standing at the edge of the room. He was a musician, someone who could communicate through sound. The adults who had once been hesitant now watched with admiration, understanding that the boy's talent was real and rare. They encouraged him, offering gentle guidance, but they also allowed him the freedom to explore, to make mistakes, and to create. Each day brought a new discovery. He learned to experiment with rhythm, tempo, and expression. He discovered that music could be soft and delicate, then loud and powerful, and that both extremes could tell a story. He explored different emotions through sound, learning to make the piano speak joy, sadness, hope, and wonder. The more he played, the more he realized that the piano was not just an instrument but a partner, a mirror of his feelings and imagination. News of the boy's talent began to spread quietly among those who had witnessed him play. People came to listen, curious and eager to hear the melodies that flowed so naturally from his hands. At first, the boy felt nervous with an audience, but he soon discovered that sharing his music added a new dimension to the experience. Each person who listened became part of the story, their reactions, smiles, and silence becoming a part of the music itself. He learned that music was a bridge, connecting people in a way words could not. The boy's compositions grew in complexity. He began to write small pieces, each one a reflection of his life, his dreams, and the moments he had observed and experienced. Some pieces were bright and cheerful, inspired by sunlight and laughter. Others were slow and reflective, born from quiet evenings and contemplation. Every piece carried a piece of his heart, a fragment of his soul. And every time he played, he felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that the music was a gift both to himself and to those who listened. The grand piano became a constant in his life, a place where he could go to explore, to practice, and to dream. He spent hours discovering the subtleties of the instrument, learning how different pressures and finger placements could change the sound, how slight adjustments could create harmony or tension. He experimented endlessly, often losing track of time, completely absorbed in the music. The piano was no longer an object of longing but a source of endless possibilities. One day, an adult who had been particularly supportive suggested that the boy perform for a small gathering. The boy hesitated, feeling nervous at the thought of people watching him play. But he also felt ready, stronger and more confident than ever before. He agreed, and the day arrived with quiet anticipation. The room was filled with people who had never heard him play, and for a moment, he felt the familiar rush of nerves. But as soon as his fingers touched the keys, the fear melted away, replaced by focus, joy, and the thrill of creation. He began with a soft, simple melody, allowing the audience to ease into the music. Gradually, he introduced more complex passages, his fingers moving effortlessly, translating thoughts and emotions into sound. The listeners were captivated, their attention fixed on the boy and the music flowing from the grand piano. They could feel the emotion in every note, the care in every chord, the wonder in every phrase. It was as if the music carried a story that words could never capture, a story of patience, hope, and the fulfillment of a dream. As he played, the boy noticed the smiles on the faces of those listening, the way some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. It was a moment of connection, a shared experience that went beyond explanation. He realized that music was a language that could speak to anyone, regardless of age, background, or experience. The power of his gift was not just in the skill of his fingers, but in the ability to touch hearts, to inspire awe, and to bring joy and reflection. When the piece ended, there was a quiet pause. Then, one by one, people began to clap, softly at first, then more enthusiastically. The boy felt a surge of happiness and pride, but also humility. He had shared a part of himself, and it had been received with warmth and appreciation. He understood that the journey was ongoing, that there were always new melodies to discover, new emotions to express, and new audiences to touch. But for now, he allowed himself to savor the moment, to bask in the quiet triumph of a dream realized. The boy's confidence continued to grow. He began to explore different styles of music, experimenting with improvisation, rhythm, and emotion. He discovered that he could create tension and release, excitement and calm, all within the span of a single piece. The piano had become a voice for his imagination, a channel through which he could express what he had long held inside. Every day, every practice session, every performance added layers to his skill and understanding. He also began to mentor other children who showed an interest in music. He shared what he had learned about patience, practice, and listening to the sound around them. He encouraged them to explore, to experiment, and to find their own voices. The boy realized that part of the joy of music was not only playing but helping others discover the same excitement and wonder that he had felt when first touching the grand piano. Music had become more than a personal passion. It had become a bridge to others, a way to inspire, teach, and share. Years passed, and the boy grew into a young musician, known for both his skill and the emotion he brought to every performance. Yet, he never forgot the moment he first touched the piano, the longing, the practice, the patience, and the quiet determination that had led him to this point. Every time he returned to the instrument, he felt the memory of that first note, the thrill of discovery, and the joy of creation. It was a constant reminder that dreams could come true with dedication, courage, and belief in oneself. The boy understood now that the piano was more than an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a mirror of his heart. He had learned to listen not only to the sounds he produced but to the emotions they conveyed. He had discovered that music could tell stories, capture feelings, and connect people in ways words could not. And he had realized that the journey was just as important as the destination, that every practice session, every mistake, every note played with care and attention was a step toward mastery. The boy's story became an inspiration to many. People who had witnessed his early struggles and later triumphs spoke of the power of patience, persistence, and the courage to pursue one's passion. The grand piano that once seemed untouchable had become a symbol not only of talent but of determination, hope, and the beauty that could emerge when a dream was nurtured with care. And for the boy, now a young musician, the journey continued, filled with endless melodies, boundless creativity, and the joy of sharing his gift with the world. In the quiet moments, when he was alone with the piano, he would often reflect on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the longing, the denial, the secret practice, and the first magical moment when his fingers had touched the keys and the music had flowed. Each memory carried lessons of patience, resilience, and faith in himself. He understood that the greatest wonders often came after the greatest struggles, that dedication and passion could overcome obstacles, and that the love for one's craft was the most powerful guide of all. The boy had become more than a talented musician. He had become a storyteller, a teacher, and a source of inspiration. He had learned that music was not just about skill or recognition but about the connection it could create, the emotions it could stir, and the lives it could touch. And as he sat at the grand piano, fingers poised to play, he knew that each note was a continuation of his journey, a reminder of how far he had come, and a promise of the endless music still waiting to be discovered.